This video was brought to you by the part of me that was not satisfied with the emotions that came up after reading the story The Liar's Diary. I was filled with such hatred and contempt just for one person in this story. That person was a woman named Jean Cross, the main character and narrator, who was a mother herself, somehow caught in the merciless soul-crushing machine that was motherhood. Motherhood plagued by the horror of an abusive husband and the emptiness of a life defined entirely by the role society, specifically the patriarchy, had thrust her into with zero preparation or choice. I understood that my hatred was baseless, but it would not recede because several people, the people she claimed to love especially, got hurt and murdered. It was unconscionable, yet my feelings, though valid, still made no sense. Consequently, I bored through the haze of hate to see what lay beneath it, what spoiled it, what fed it, and kept it blazing in the face of this particularly entangled mess that was Jean Cross's life. Bear with me as the video starts slow because a contemplation is required when you are faced with puzzling situations you lack the mental skill set to unravel. In this video, I will attempt to deconstruct motherhood by way of papers written by expert psychologists and professionals, also by the review of this book which centers motherhood and one of the most challenging situations any mother could face. Yet the patriarchy has never provided nor equipped women the tools to deal with since the beginning of time. All it has offered consistently has been a judgment and condemnation of said women, while pushing harder than ever for more women to be compelled into this role of mother and coerced into performing motherhood. So, if I were to tell you to think of feelings associated with the word mother, I wonder what you'd say. The first thing I just off my head is safety. Safety, you know, the safety of having your mom, or the void of not having that safety that a mom offers. And it's like, okay, if you didn't have a mom, or if you don't have a mom, what does mother feel like to you? It's too nuanced, yeah, to just have this summary feeling about it. But I will mention that when government and politicians prop up mothers and motherhood, they automatically see a shield, a Kevlar vest, some iron maiden whose only duty is to protect her child. Doesn't matter the gender of the politician in question here. And because of this idealized perspective of mother, they allow no room, or they give no room for the nuance that comes with being an individual first before becoming a mother, or before being a mother. This absence of nuance, this rejection of nuance, leads to a scale of tragedy and loss that doesn't really have statistics, on paper to record or to leave behind. And what do we mean by this tragedy? This tragedy is experienced mostly by the body that gives said mother such mythological endowment, and that is a child. When I started up the idea for this video, I had to go through the grueling process of looking up papers, research papers by experts, to uncover if there are records of situations like this And unfortunately, aside from the bureaucracy of not being able to access papers that are not written by people in this country, and also the bureaucracy of being attached to an institution to access research papers, and also just money in general, there were a lot of papers written by women that I could not access, which is not anybody's fault. It's just the way things are. Yeah. So the papers I could actually get my hands on were papers from 1970s, and the papers mostly written by a group of written by a group of old men, because imagine the gender equality of the time. And of course, men were in charge of writing it, and I'm not disparaging their experts, just because they are men, their expertise because they are men. I'm just saying that a lot of the way they wrote those papers lacked the other side view of it, in the sense that if a woman, because I also saw a women's paper on this particular issue, and I'll get to the issue in a bit, but I also saw women's paper on this particular issue, and they called out, this way of giving off their own professional what do you call it, professional conclusions, from these case studies. And when they called it, I was something I was not, like, I wouldn't have picked up, because I'm not a professional in that sense. Yeah. So like, it was really helpful to see a feminine or a female view on this kind of situation. And so the situation I'm talking about is child abuse, and not child abuse on its own, but child abuse perpetrated, because who else abuses a child's family? Child abuse perpetrated by parents. In this case, I was looking specifically to CSA cases wreaked by fathers on their children of both genders, both female, like girls and boys. But for this particular study specifically, the female one applies, but the male, like father on son CSA, was the nitty-gritty of what I hoped to find through my research, my own paper, my own digging through the internet. And as it would be, I found just a couple of papers, I mean 2 papers from the 1970s. Due to the bureaucracy reasons I have listed earlier on, but also as the paper would enlighten me on, the cases of CSA, as in father on son CSA, father son incest, were not reported. Case reporting. The reporting of sexual abuse of boys to public agencies is substantially less than that for girls. Finkel Hall, forthcoming, has reviewed several general surveys and clinical studies, finding that the former indicates high rates of abuse of males, which implies that the sexual abuse of boys is not coming to public attention in any proportion near its incidence, nor are professional services being provided to the same extent as the sexual abuse of girls. He argues further that abuse of boys is underreported owing to social and cultural factors, especially the male ethic of self-reliance, combined with the fear by the child that if he reports an incident, his independence and activities might be restricted. Further, because all studies indicate that most abuse of male children is by a same-sex partner, a double stigma emerges in the violation of the heterosexual norm, as well as the prohibition of the use of a child as a sexual partner. If the victimizer of the male child is the child's father, it could be argued that the incest taboo would increase further the child's reluctance to report the experience. And I started this conversation with mother because I wanted to know what the psychology or the pathology of psychopathology of the mother in situations like this, where I'm talking about persistent, consistent abuse of the child by the father. All the mothers live in those situations. And so the papers I got, I was able to piece together that a man, a husband, a father that is abusing his children is definitely not going to be all sunshine and flowers with the mother. The mother would also undergo from the hand at the hands of the father consistent emotional, verbal, and mostly physical abuse also. Like domestic violence would be rampant in such a home. Another common characteristic found in the mothers of incest victims is chronic depression. Geiser and Conan believe depression accounts for her inability to mother and her emotional distance from both her husband and daughter. It may also be related to her sexual withdrawal and passivity with her husband. Vandermeer believes the key characteristics is the mother's despair, for it renders her powerless to protect her children. Ward deduces from the literature that mothers in incestuous families are, even by patriarchal standards, unusually oppressed. She is extremely dependent upon and subservient to her husband. She is desperately fearful of provoking her husband's anger or risking his desertion. If the price of maintaining the marriage includes the sexual sacrifice of her daughter, she will raise no effective objections. Her first loyalty is to her husband, as he has taught her. Regardless of his behavior, she believes she has no other choice. Thus, when maternal collusion in incest occurs, it is a measure of maternal powerlessness. The mother feels too alone to attempt to stop them. She may collude for the following reasons. 1. She's economically dependent on her husband. She fears facing the reality of a shattered family, divorce, going on welfare, etc. 2. She is socially dependent on her husband. She believes being a good woman means being a subservient wife. 3. She's afraid emotionally and physically of confronting her husband about raping her daughter. And 4. She realizes that society will blame her. Something has gone wrong within her family, and society will see it as her fault. Powerlessness of the mother exacerbates the child's suffering. And not to get too ahead of myself, I checked up the research on the mothers in cases where fathers abused their daughters. And these men, these people that made this research and put together these studies, they kind of came to some sort of, through their own research here and studies, they came to this conclusion that most times when fathers reach out to their daughters for sexual satisfaction and just, rape and all of that, these research guys, they concluded that the mother was probably rejected by the father for not being able to satisfy him sexually. And it wasn't in all cases they got such a result, but that was the conclusion they were leaning into. And then I read this women perspective research, like done by female doctors, female psychologists, and they refuted this to the core. The two specific components in the mother's behavior which causes theorists to blame her for abandoning her family and encouraging the incest to occur are: 1. Her abdication of her role as a mother and housewife while delegating those responsibilities to her daughter, and 2. Her backing out of her sexual role as a wife. This was done by Conan, 1983. In looking at the accusation of abandoning her family, at times the mother's failure to act as a restraining agent is simply a matter of her being absent from the home or incapacitated when the incestuous situation is developing. Occasionally, the mother's death is proposed as a form of abandonment, which causes the father to rape the daughter. Ward, in 1985, insists that in no other context has death been considered an act of will on the part of the deceased. The invincible assumption is that the mother's death leaves the husband without a sexual outlet that the daughter must now fulfill. In short study in 1980, over half the mothers are partially incapacitated by mental or physical illnesses or alcoholism, They assume an invalid role within their home or are periodically absent due to hospitalization. Gligor reports that 16% of the mothers are pregnant when the incest begins. This suggests that pregnancy, although not a long duration, may function as an incapacitating illness in its effect on the family role structure. Meiselman. Other causes for the mother's absence, in which the daughter assumes more of an adult role, include working outside the home, going to school, having her work hours changed, nursing another ill member of the family, or being ill herself. Sanford does not believe the mother's absence is the cause of the incestuous situation, nor should she be blamed for precipitating the onset of incest. In fact, recognizing that incestuous families tend to isolate themselves, Sanford views the mother's interest outside her home as being a healthy move. She believes the incest would have happened whether the mother left the home or not. She bases this belief on the fact that other homes have absent mothers and no incest occurs, and there are incestuous homes where the mother is always present, which do not prevent the abuse from occurring. She believes the mother, whatever she did or failed to do, is not responsible for the father sexually abusing his child. Sanford stresses that little girls seeking affection, attention, or favors from their fathers are definitely not asking him to throw his better judgment to the wind and sexually exploit them. The child never intends the closeness and warmth to become sexual. Incest is an adult interpretation of the child's wishes, an interpretation greatly influenced by the father's own needs. Ultimately, the father must take responsibility for his actions, not the mother. Butler notes that within the incestuous family, a mother is expected to enthusiastically fulfill all her husband's needs and remain nurturing, loving, and accessible to all members of the family except herself. She is not free to acknowledge her own interests or act upon them in a self-actualizing manner. Butler stresses that a mother focusing on her own life by taking a job, returning to school, developing outside interests, or growing less dependent on her husband may actually be creating an opportunity for personal growth of all members of her family, not abandoning them. They were like, nothing about the relationship of between the mother and the father triggers the father going to rape his daughter, in the sense of seeking solace or succor from their daughters, from his daughter. There's nothing between the relationship that does that. The man is just wired like that. Second heading that theorist, as I mentioned earlier, is the theory of the wife backing out of her sexual role. In this paper states, in evaluating the second accusation of the mother backing out of her sexual role as a wife, there is an expectation that the wife will always be available for her husband's sexual needs. It is assumed that the wife is failing in her duties if her husband feels sexually frustrated. The idea that a woman has a right to decide what should happen to her body does not even enter consideration. Butler points out that often the mother is married to a brutal or unaffectionate sexual partner who confirms her earliest fears that sex is ugly, unfeeling, or a source of conflict and tension. Incestuous fathers tend to overemphasize sexual behavior as the only acceptable context for providing comforting affection, nurturing play, and other needs that actually may be fulfilled in a non-sexual manner. The wives describe having their husbands force sexual relations upon them. They feel their needs are being invalidated, which results in diminishing their desire to have sexual relations. Guys have found that 92 out of 100 mothers report they are sexually unsatisfied. What states it seems most probable that many of these husbands are not, in quote, good in bed. From what is known of their behavior with their daughters, the fathers are mostly concerned with their own pleasure. Therefore, it is not unreasonable to assume that they approach their wives in the same manner. Most women would find this ignorant and selfish form of male sexual behavior repugnant and insulting. Ward believes the mother may be justly protecting herself from further sexual degradation at the hands of her husband. So it's like these girls become socialized to become these girls are socialized to be mothers, to see themselves as mother representative, and I guess that's where the male psychologists were coming from, in the sense like they wanted to connect, because this behavior of a father seeking raping his daughter is not normal psychology. But these women refuted it with hard facts. A man that has a history of abuse is not raping a child for sexual, like romantic satisfaction. It is just the habit of domination that he has been conditioned to see as his right as a man. That is just my conclusion of what I read. Actually, I will put the paper down for those people that are interested. And it really just shook me clear of a haze, because I almost believed it. Professionals and all that, I almost believe it. Almost, please, being the being the guiding word. There's a startling difference in numbers of case reports of young girls being assaulted by their fathers, and sons, young boys, young children, boys being assaulted by their father. Just too much disparity. The discussion on this paper: attitudes and behaviors of fathers who have sexual contact with a son or sons vary considerably. This, combined with incomplete data in most of the cases, limits analysis. Nevertheless, comparison of these cases with numerous and often well-researched clinical reports of father-daughter incest provides contrast, suggesting questions for future exploration about the nature of father-son incest. Girls speak up, but boys don't speak up as little as they are, because like these children are the same age group. Well, the author states that the boy is confronted with a demand for role performance inappropriate to his age, based on the assumption that the short-range consequences of father-son incest would be the creation of stress for the child, in which the development of self-identity and self-esteem would be in jeopardy as the child attempts to negotiate the taboos of incest and homosexuality. He is aware of culturally prescribed norms for masculinity, and these are negated by his father's behavior. The author goes further to state it is essential that these fathers and their sons experience non-judgmental professional assistance that will enable them to sort out issues related to sexual orientation and to manage less dysfunctionally the erotic component that exists in the interactions between family members. Many of these cases come to the attention of professionals and authorities long after the incestuous behavior has ended. This suggests that programs for public education and training of public officials and professionals be instituted to counteract homophobia. By creating greater social tolerance, individuals and families may be less fearful of seeking assistance when potential or actual incest between fathers and sons emerges. So basically, that is a couple of factors that influence a boy's unwillingness to come forward about abuse by his father. Therefore, the reason why boys could not speak up about their abuse was due to toxic masculinity, patriarchal expectations of how boys should behave, and homophobia. Homophobia being the focus of an incident of a boy being abused by his father, instead of the abuse itself taking being front and center. Homophobia or homophobic lens is being used to treat or attend to this boy, which is just judgment and intolerance. So no child will feel safe coming out about such a situation, such an issue, to any adult at the time. I don't know about now. And so we don't have much base or much to pick from the pool to study this kind of phenomenon of father-son incest. I'm saying we are not part of the, like, psychologists don't have it. So like I was really looking forward to what mothers do in situations, like what's the mentality of the mother in situations. And I saw, luckily for me, I saw maybe one or two, which is like a billion in this case, of like there's nothing, there's not much research in mothers in families of boys, of male children. Or even if there were, I don't have access to it. I don't have access to it. And I was looking for one that resembled this particular subject of my video. Weiner has described a family in which the father, a school teacher, had incestuous relationships with his 10-year-old daughter and his 9-year-old son. Both the mother, who was aware of the father's sexual activities, and the son were eventually hospitalized for psychotic episodes. Meiselman has described briefly an alcoholic adult who listed father-son incest and repeated hospitalizations of his mother for psychosis as early childhood trauma. Mothers in those two cases experience psychosis. Like, that's the extent of That is what happens to the mind of the mother that is aware of father son incest in these two cases. But what about the mother that ignores such cases? Could we say the mother is ignoring it is to protect their own peace of mind? Let's look at a particular case study, the case study of Christopher. At the age of 36, Christopher entered psychotherapy but discontinued after a few sessions with the explanation that he had run out of anything to say. 2 years later, he completed a course in assertiveness training and re-entered treatment with this author. He described a block that he experienced in relating to others that involved withdrawal whenever he felt the need to express a feeling. In the sixth session, with expressions of panic and fear, he stated that his father had forced him to engage in sexual relations, masturbation and oral genital contact from age 6 to 10. The practice terminating with his threat to expose his father. He had not divulged this information to anyone previously. He had one sibling, a younger sister, who had a physical disability since birth and who was hospitalized briefly for mental illness in her late adolescence. To his knowledge, his father had not molested her, although circumstantial evidence pointed clearly to the father's deviant behavior towards the son. The mother ignored it. Both parents, who were allied on all issues, treated Christopher sadistically, the father beating him severely with a smirk on his face whenever he resisted sexual advances, and the mother disparaging him as by referring to him frequently by the name of the family's dog. This upper middle class family lived in a wealthy community in which there were ample social and recreational resources. Christopher spent as much time as possible away from home participating in sports and social clubs. During his adolescence, he had several homosexual contacts with a cousin his age. In college, he dated several women, but after graduation, he confined his sexual activities strictly to men and pursued a career as a professional sportsman. At the time he entered therapy, he had recently ended a romantic relationship with a man that had lasted 5 years. The patient revelation of his secrets produced fantasies that he might be punished, if not destroyed, or that in the footsteps of his father, he, too, might become insane. In parentheses, the patient was informed by his mother that his father has been diagnosed as dangerously psychotic by a company physician upon his retirement. It is clear that Christopher had to weigh the potential gains and losses if he had reported his father's abuse to public authorities while living with his families. Would anyone believe that his father, a successful professional person married to a woman who socialized frequently with other housewives in the community, committed incest? Would his father, a violent man, retaliate? And how would his activities outside the home be restricted? How would his peers, teachers and others regard him if they knew his circumstances? Thus, a child in this situation is faced with an exceedingly painful dilemma. After all this background on the paper that I research, came about these findings from, I want to now bring into focus the specific subject matter of this video, the review of this book, The Liar's Diary. It took me a while to get through this book, as short as it seems, mostly because of the emotional events that took place within it, the whole plot twist at the end and the triggering content and all of that. But I got through it. Okay, I'm just going to give a quick rundown of the plot, and after the plot, when I say the plot, I'm saying I'm going to give the rundown of the book according to the way the main character, Jane Cross, narrated it, because this is first person's POV, yeah, and I'll tell you all about Jane Cross. Then I'm going to tell you the second female character of the book. Her name is Ali Martha, and I'm going to narrate Ali's story. So, like, after the narration of both stories, picture that I'm trying to paint here would be coming together more cohesively. So, Jane's narration first. Diary is a story centered around the lives of the Crosses and intertwined with Ali Maher. Jean Cross narrates the entire plot for us, so it is her view of the situations and events that gives us, the reader, an insight into what is happening. But our perception of whatever truly happens is colored by Jane's judgment of it. Jamie Cross is the son of the Crosses. He's 16 and attends high school at Bridgeport High, where his mom works as the secretary of the school. Gavin is his father, an orthopedic surgeon with his own private practice in town. Alice Martha, aka Ali, is a music teacher at Bridgeport High. She's new this semester. Ali is separated from her husband, Judge Martha, but they are still married on paper. Judge Martha is a renowned lawyer with a philosophy degree. Jack Butterfield is the owner of a car dealership in town and he is Ali's current boyfriend. Ali starts an affair with Brian Shagari, a teacher at school who is married to a woman named Beth. With two sons, Ali kickstarts a friendship with Jane Cross out of the blue by asking her for car rides to and from school. They live on the same street. Gavin is not happy about this. Jamie is anxious about this as well. Jane has never had any female friend in her life, so she loves this. She likes Ali. Eventually, by everyone, the whole town and the school body finds out about Ali's affair with Brian. But Brian is obsessed with Ali and leaves his family for her. Meanwhile, she agreed to a one-night stand with him only to make her boyfriend Jack feel jealous, which she succeeds at. So she no longer needs Brian and tells him as much. He, after losing his job being inappropriate at school by following her around and disrupting students with his extreme moaning, he ends up taking his own life at the city motel he lived while being separated from his wife. Jean comforts Ali, all while judging her for egging him on, to which Ali is contrite and despondent. Remorseful, so remorseful she turns her resolution to help depressed people towards Jane. This compels Jane to make an appointment with a child psychiatrist for her son Jimmy, because you see, Jamie had been stalking Ali by breaking into her home, going through her things, defacing her property, stealing trinkets from her apartment and hiding it in his bedroom, which Jane is privy to, yet never fesses it up to Ali, who by now is her best friend. Gabby finds out about the appointment and cancels it a day before it is scheduled, all while blaming Ali for Jamie's odd behaviors and claiming that Jane was responsible for making their son normal. That is, it was her duty to make sure he was a normal teenager instead of an overweight, compulsively eating disordered child. One day, Jean breaks into Gavin's secret room while he's away at a conference and she finds evidence that he's having an affair with Ali. Feeling betrayed, she goes to confront her friend, and Ali, responding warily, tells Jean that yes, she knows about Gavin's affair and no, it was not with her but a boy named Marcus. Stunned, Jean tries to run away from this truth and she leaves Ali, goes home, packs a bag and drives interstate up to her family's abandoned cabin in the woods. It was bequeathed to her by her late father. Speaking of father, let's get into Jane's backstory. Her brother, when he was 16, got into a fatal accident and the loss was so devastating for the family that 7 months after this, her father passed on from a heart attack. Jane was only 14 at the time, and 4 years later, her mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, which would eventually take her life. But before she passed, she witnessed her daughter Jane marrying Gavin Cross, a doctor at the hospital where she received treatment. How did they meet? Well, Jane was supposed to attend a Christmas concert with her mom, but she was too sick day off to attend, so Jane was persuaded by her mom to go alone. Lonely and wrecked by sadness at the tender age of 18, being by herself at the concert, she was surprised to see Gavin fall into the seat beside her. He patted her through her tears and afterwards took her to a coffee shop where she poured out her heart to him while he listened patiently. That night, Jane fell in love. At least that's what she believed of the whole thing. 3 months after that night, they were married. At the cabin, Jane cleans up as best as she could. In her heart, she determined that this would be the start of something new for her and Jamie. There were calls from Gavin on her burner phone. After a couple of days, she receives a call from Gavin and he informs her that her friend Ali had been murdered in her own home. Jane speeds all the way back to her life in Bridgeport. So, Alice Martha, aka Ali, was a victim of CSA at the hands of her father from preteen till she was 19 years, where she could no longer bear it in silence and straight up told her mother what was going on. The father, after being exposed, walked into his study and ate a bullet. This ugly turn of events revealed to Ali that her mother was aware of her husband's abusive activities towards her because she immediately accused Ali of killing him. Her younger sister also blamed her for her father's death. Her father did not abuse her sister though, and feeling isolated and distraught, Ali turned away from her family and never looked back. Years later, Ali is an accomplished violinist, ambitious about taking her career to the next level always. She gets married to Judge Mata, who is everything to Ali. Yet, Ali's shadows haunt her and eventually causes her separation from her husband. They are still married on paper, but he buys her a small apartment in the area and gives his blessings to her every actions and decision. Ali starts dating Jack Butterfield, a hottie who runs the car dealership in their town. But things were starting to get stale between them, so she had a fling with her co-worker at the high school where she recently started teaching at the start of this book as the music teacher. The co-worker's name is Brian Shagari, a man that is married with two kids. At the school where she works, always conscious of her childhood trauma, she extends an empathetic hand out to possible victims amidst her students, and fearfully she is approached by a lone kid, Jamie Cross. Jamie is being abused sexually by his own father, and he's terrified throughout his conversations with Ali. He has nothing to fear though, because Ali validates his experience, and she also lets him know that she was a victim herself as a kid when she was his age. Eventually, though, she tells Jamie that the only way to deal with it would be to inform the authorities. This causes Jamie to freak out, and he shuts her down immediately. Yet, as an adult, Ali feels duty bound to report it to help him. Jamie, seeing no way out, starts pestering her in his own way. He stalks her home, he steals her trinkets, he leaves signs that he's been in her home. He faces her music sheets, all in a bid to scare her to back down, to scare her into backing down or just forgetting about it entirely. Ali, trying to help him by not being rash, decides to approach his mother, Jane Cross. Jane is the secretary to the principal of the high school where Ali and where Jamie attends. They have absolutely nothing in common, but Ali scrounges up an excuse of needing lift to and from school since they live in the same neighborhood. By getting close to Jane, though, Jamie's anxiety spikes. But as Ali comes to see, his anxiety was pointless because it seems like Jane has always known about it, and she dealt with it through staunch denial, taking drugs like Valium from her husband unprescribed to sleep through the night when Gavin indulged in his perverted activities, that is, abusing his own son. She would take Valium from him that he would willingly, gladly give her, and she would sleep through the night, not aware of a thing. And then when she interacted with Jamie, she merely sustained his junk food habit. To her, it was like a coping mechanism that she felt she could afford him. Although all of this was not clearly stated in any of her thoughts or in her narration, she never outwardly vocalized her processing. But from the way the story goes or the way the story ends, like you can easily piece together that is what she was doing. That was how she managed Jamie's situation in her Anyways, head. Ali does her very best though, suggesting, implying, giving unsaid statements, and at a junction of vulnerability, she convinces Jean to schedule an appointment with a child psychologist. This junction of vulnerability was Brian Shagari's suicide. Remember Brian, the guy she had an affair with to back up her relationship? Well, this jealousy stint worked wonders for Ali and Jack's relationship, and she decided that was the end of his role in her life, which he didn't take too well, as in he had already left his family entirely and started sleeping outside his home at a motel in town. At school, he abandoned his duties as a woodshop teacher to follow Ali wherever she went, watching her from outside the classes or professing his love loudly to her in the hallway, to the scandal of students and other teachers. Ali, though, is unfazed by all of this. She simply completed that semester in the school, and followed up her career opportunities of playing an orchestra in the big city. She leaves the school entirely after that semester, and at that point Brian gave up. Back to Gavin and Jim Cross's life. Gavin cancelled the appointment. He cowered his son into compliance shamelessly and verbally abused Jean into throwing out the idea entirely. So Ali's effort was fruitless. Eventually, though, Jean walked into a direct confrontation of the truth herself in such a way that she was unable to run away or hide from it. And then Ali ended up dead. But there is a sequence of events. You see, Jean upended Gavin's secret room. Yes, he had a secret room in their home, which nobody was allowed to enter, not her or Jamie. And somehow she came to the conclusion that he was having an out of town affair with Ali by way of hotel charges on his personal credit card receipts. Hotels being the same ones Ali stayed at when she was out on concerts. Anyway, she goes to Alice to confront her about this. Ali blatantly drops the truth that Gavin was not having an affair with her but with Marcus, the 19-year-old kid who accompanied her on concerts. Jean, flabbergasted, runs back home, picks up a duffel, packs it up, and drives to an abandoned cabin in the woods, leaving her son alone with his abusive father. After a few days staying in the woods, Jean receives several calls from home, which she decides to ignore. And then Ali has a confrontation with Jamie. You see, Jamie had had enough of the anxiety of the situation and he wanted to deal with her in one final way. So he went to her home with a hunting knife. Before he got into her home, because he knew his way around her home, he cut off all the phone lines so she wouldn't be able to call any emergency services or the police. And then he confronted her with the knife, holding it to her neck, and nicked her in such a way that there was a wound on the spot. Although at the sight of blood, he panicked, dropped the knife, and apologized profusely while running out of the house. At that point, Ali was so shaken, but she decided not to call the police immediately since all the phone lines had been cut. She instead went to a phone booth outside her home and made a call to Jean, desperately asking her to return, that if she didn't return, she would have to call the police on Jamie. At that, Jean returned. Jean rushed back home to Ali. Ali was so relieved to see her best friend Jean in her home that night that she handed the little silver pistol Jack had given her to protect herself from the stalking event by both Jamie and Brian. She gave this pistol to Jean and told her that she didn't even like touching the thing and she didn't know what to do with it, that Jane needed to hold on to it for her. And so they sat down at the sofa and started to talk. At that point, Jean downed a glass of brandy, claiming to be mystified about what Ali had just said. Ali had just revealed that her approach of Jean was not random and that there was no need for the rights. Jean told her that this could not be true because it was so uncomfortable for them that first week. Like, why would she put herself through that just to approach her? And what reason would she have for approaching her? And then Ali goes on to say, that's because I knew you wouldn't believe me. I could see it in the way you held yourself. I imagine she's fitting Jane into the memory of her own mother at the time she was being abused by her father. Your tight smile, even if I told you in the plainest language possible, you would have found a way to deny it, to discredit me. And in the process, Jane is twitchy, uncomfortable, wanting to escape the room. So she tries to deflect the focus by accusing Ali of faking her friendship with her. To which Ali responds by placing a gentle hand on her arm and refuting the accusation, declaring that yes, she had an ulterior motive for approaching her, but that Jean became the best girlfriend she had ever had. But Jean was experiencing an unbearable tension coursing through her body and tried to be rid of it by asking Ali if she ever got round to the reason why she approached her, still pretending she didn't understand what Ali was talking about. Ali in that moment kept trying to make Jean own up to what was happening in her home. So determined she was to break the wall of denial Jean had put up that she didn't notice Jean slipping the pistol into her jacket pocket. Jean kept parroting, I have no idea what you're talking about, but Ali had enough. Taking Jean by the shoulder, she said, you are going to listen, Jean. This time you have no choice, and then you are going to act. You can't take the coward's way out any longer. Not hearing, not seeing, not knowing. God, Jane, do you have any idea how much I despise you? Jane was filled with so much fear that Ali was going to destroy the illusions and lies she had spent years protecting. She knew she had to stop her. She had to make her quiet. She couldn't let her tell everyone how she had failed her son. And most of all, she couldn't bear to hear it herself. And so, she shot Ali right through the chest. After killing Ali, Jean leaves the house and pretends or puts up a mental block about the incident until the police start questioning everyone around and in town, and then all the signs led to the Crosses family because the hunting knife was still in Ali's home with Jamie's print all over. There was no gun and there was no sign of the gun that was used to kill Ali, but the prints were the only evidence the police had to go off on. Therefore, they decided to arrest Jamie. Jamie was a minor, so he was going to serve in juvenile hall. The way the situation kept going, He was already determined that Jamie would be taking the fall for the crime that his mother committed, but nobody knew who actually committed that crime. Judge Martha was getting pretty close to figuring it out until Jean came to him herself and confessed everything. But before that, Jean had a moment with Jamie during visitation when she tried to console him about the situation, and he looked her in the eye and told her that he feels a lot of peace about his sentencing, meaning he felt safer looking forward to the rest of his life in juvenile hall or prison even than going back home to either of his parents. And at that, without words being said, Jean burst into tears. Finally, both of them confronted the truth that lay at the heart of their family, and that was Gavin's abuse. After a lot of tears were shed, Jean had a resolution. She determined to protect her son one final time. She went home, stirred up Gavin's feelings, directly confronted him with what Jamie had told her, and he first up, he said it was just one time he did it and it didn't mean anything. But by then, unknowingly to him, Jean was secretly recording the conversation. This recording is what she also turned into the police as she gave up her confession of her crime to the police. This way, even if she was going to be sentenced to jail for life, her son would not have to be subjected to custody of his abusive father. He would be instead in protection of the system, the legal system for children. After Gavin's arrest was made public, little boys across the town, across the suburbs, from church, from the hospital, came forward with their own accusations of sexual abuse by Gavin. He had access to these children because he was a trusted member of the society and also because of his position as a doctor. Anyways, the clause that came with Jane's sentencing was that she was required to see a prison psychologist while she served her term. Serving time with the prison psychologist, she had to confront the mental block she put up about Jamie's abuse and Ali's murder. And so the psychologist asked her to start writing the event in her diary. She asked her to write it from the first person perspective so that she would no longer depersonalize what she had actually done, so that she would no longer push it onto a third party, her actual crime. That's how the last diary, I guess, had his name. To me personally, I see Ali's vet as the result of a psychotic break on Jean's part. Shooting somebody when she had never even handled or seen a gun before would only be described as psychotic break, and we saw it in the research earlier that mothers in father-son incest families usually end up with a psychotic break. I think it's also important to emphasize where my hatred was coming from so that the research will make it clear how that was not entirely on her. I hated her for not protecting Jamie. I hated her for pretending that Jamie was not going through this abuse, for invalidating Jamie's truth. I hated her for murdering Ali, who wanted to protect Jamie, like whose entire goal was to protect Jamie somehow. I hated her for, after murdering her, still putting up a mental block about the fact that she had murdered her, to the extent that her son was now on trial for murdering Ali instead of her, and she kept holding on to it. The only moment where there was a break was when Jamie was, I feel safer here in prison. It was really intense because she acknowledged that she had failed her son in that moment. Like, she went to the research, which I will still get to, the research done by the female psychologist. There's a very wonderful, astute conclusion they came to that really flipped me on my head, like about my hatred of her. As I wanted to know, what do mothers, like in real life situations, like what do mothers, in situations like that, how do they cope with the reality of their children being abused, you get? And from the research we saw that a lot of them are incapacitated, and even if some of them were incapacitated, there were some astute reasons why these women refused to like speak up and instead decided to collude with the father that was abusing their sons or their daughters. And yeah, I listed all those points very well, like according to the research that was done. And the final point was so, it's just exactly what Jane parroted, yeah, when before she put the bullet through Ali. Like, she couldn't face up to the fact that she had failed her son, and then like the last reason stated in the research was that most of these women realize that something is wrong within their family, and they know that society will blame them for this thing that is wrong in their family, and they are scared to face that judgment. It just became clear to me that in the moment when I was hating on Jean, I became society. Like, I just was an agent of society, heaping judgment and punishment upon somebody whose entire existence be should not revolve around a child. How do I say this in a more sensitive way? In that moment, I became an agent of society. I became the judge, you know. I became judge, jury, all of it. I became executioner because my hatred was so intense of her. Like, after I was done reading the book, and I'm so happy that that intense feeling, I was able to sit with it and look through it, instead of just concluding, oh my god, the book is so interesting, and you will hate this character, oh, she's so evil, she's mad, she's this, she's that. And it's like, I think that's the joy of reading, like, it's supposed to take you places that you don't even know, you could go. I'm the type of person that I will stand up for women's rights. I would speak up. Like, I want women's rights to be respected. I want women's rights to just be a normal thing that is a matter of course in society, which at this point in time it is not yet so. And so, if I'm saying I want women's rights to be respected, to be acknowledged by society, I wouldn't expect myself to, in turn, you know be a sexist oppressor of said woman. My judgment of Jean was rooted in sexism. There are two people involved in having a child. Usually there are two people involved in having a child. But when something goes wrong in the child's life, when the child is harmed, and interestingly, when the child is harmed by one half of this parent, one half of this couple, why did I just rush or race to blame the mother? So that rushing to blame Jean, I'm so glad that I explored it, because I also, in this whole study of everything, I came across this wonderful quote by Bell Hooks, where she stated that we teach children to understand abuse as love. I don't know if I'm being accurate right now, but that's basically what she said. That we teach them that we can violate them and call it love, you know. And in that moment where Jean, although she was not in the psychological frame of mind to support her child, she was colluding with her husband. In that moment, she was colluding with her husband in the abuse of her son, of their son. She was violating him, and she was naming it love. Not specifically naming it love, but she claimed to love him. So, like, it's more or less the same thing to poor Jamie. So there are some struggles. I'd like to highlight the struggles I encountered in putting together this essay. The first one is obvious. Like, I found myself hating her so much, I came full on into yelling justifications for her crime, which is kind of where I'm at now. Like, motherhood in its full scope, as intended by the patriarchy, is a damning lock on the individuality and personhood of woman, any woman. So, coming into his detailed breakdown, especially over Jane's life, I saw how insignificant she was in the grand scheme of the system that she tried but failed to uphold. One thing Jane did was to perform motherhood. Jane performed motherhood to the T, and yet she failed her son in the most basic way. Like, in the most she failed her son in the most, like, rudimentary aspect of it, which was just protecting your child. And I can only see it as a failure if she is presenting her performance of motherhood as, as a prerequisite for acknowledging her as a mother. Does this make sense? Like, Jane is here performing motherhood and she's getting 100 marks according to society. But like the part that society doesn't talk about is this part where this aspect of motherhood where women at the end of the day they are in partnership with people that are conditioned to dominate them in a sexist way, to oppress them in a sexist way, and the women are also socialized to accept sexist oppression. And so like when those kind of interaction meet and a child comes into that play, there is no way this child is not going to be a victim. You know, it doesn't even have to be CSA. There are other forms of abuse that parents put their children through. Parents that make their children their parents, parents that make their children or just like entirely neglect their children, parents that emotionally abuse their children, parents that are indifferent to their children. All of these are all forms of abuse. But like these parents are performing parenthood according to societies, the mothers also are performing motherhood. They are providing for them, they are sending them to school, they give them a roof over their head, they give them clothes over their back, and what, like all of those things are being met. And that's what society, that's where society's surveillance ends at, where society's expectation ends at. But society also implicitly places this expectation, this emotional aspect that they cannot quantify but they expect you to fulfill on mothers. I'm going around the circle, but let's just continue. The second struggle, for me, it was trying, it was hard to not be swayed full on in my expectations of the protection of the child to rest solely on the mother gene. Like, how do I mentally divide Jean's share of the load of caring and protecting for their kid in comparison with Gavin, especially since I'm aware of the socialized lens through which I view the scope of motherhood. So like I just carry Jean and in my head I just place her in what I'm socialized to be motherhood is about, and I throw her in there and I watch her. According to her narration, I see her do her best, even when she's trying to cover up for his literal crimes of stalking and harassment and what, breaking and entering. I'm still like saying, okay, yeah, you are performing as a mother. Like most mothers, like some mothers protect their children from the law in that sense, you know. And it's like, okay, but what about the aspect where this kind of situation, like, why do I feel like it is on Jean to protect her child from her son, from his father? And the research that we just went through early on in the video answers that question for us, that it is not Jean's entire, it's not the sole responsibility of the mothers to protect their child from incestuous fathers. You know, the fathers are full-grown adults with thinking faculties, and so if they pathologically process their children as sexual objects, as sexual partners, why don't we have that visceral feeling of judgment on them? Like, you might have it personally, like you might have this judgment, but like when you think about it, it's like people say things like, oh, he's not a man, of course he will fuck anything that, you know, or of course a man will like rape. It's not normal to, of course a man will rape, of course a man will assault a child. It's not normal. It is socialized to be seen as that statement. It is sexist socialization that brings us to that point where we see this behavior of men as, of course. No, it's not all men that, like the paper goes on to say that there are mothers that are ill, there are mothers that are never at home, there are mothers that are always at home, and they don't have incest cases in those homes. So that means it's not all men that, it's not all fathers that abuse their children like that. Yeah, it's not all fathers that abuse their children like that. So these fathers are unique in that aspect of turning their children, of making their children into sexual objects for their own satisfaction. They are unique in it, but why do they not feel the same weight of judgment from society at the thought of them being exposed? Why is it that the mothers feel it more? Why is it that the mothers go into psychotic shock? Why is it that, like Jane, she had to go to the point of killing somebody so that society would not judge her as a failure for not protecting her son? But Gavin could rationalize it as, oh, it's just one time. Meanwhile, Gavin is an oddity. He's odd. He should be able to, he should be socialized also from a young age to see the idea of failing his children, to see the idea of participating in such a behavior as something weighty, as something that could wreck his entire sense of self, that it could push him into psychotic shock. Well, we had a research case I mentioned earlier in Christopher's father ended up running mad or something like that. So like, yeah, maybe they do run mad, but like before they are being exposed, why are they not raised to perceive this weight of societal expectations on them like the mothers do? So like, it's not an of course, it's not an of course, and it is sexist socialization. I keep on mentioning sexist socialization because I've read a lot of Bell Hooks, this Bell Hooks book, Feminist Theory from Margin to Center, and she defines feminism as the movement to end sexist domination, sexist oppression. And reading her book, although I'm not done with it, um that's basically what she keeps on reiterating all through the book and giving points, really really salient points, fresh perspective on this definition of it. I wanted to divide this load, and say, okay, Jean, this is your load of, like, this is the load of the responsibility you bear towards protecting your child. And then I can now judge her so that I could freely judge and hate her, so I could crucify her on the cross of my sexist expectations over her. But I didn't want to end up speaking and playing into patriarchal talking points. Yeah. And so that's why I had to go all out. I had to really research. I didn't want to end up doing that to Jean in my judgment of her. And the third is that for me to do this, like this second struggle, for me to not play to patriarchal talking points, I have to recognize Jean's personhood. But then in this story, Jean does not have a personhood. Jean is not an individual. Jean is mother and wife. There is nothing outside of mother and wife Jean Cross. Our relationship with Ali was actually shaping that thing into being. Obviously, everybody has an individual self outside of the roles they play. But like, if you lay it to bed, like, you don't exercise that individualhood, like, nobody's going to see you yourself. You're going to get lost in it, in the other roles you play, and forget that, oh, I'm actually a person, which is what a lot of mothers can testify happening to them after having their first, their second, their third or 10th child. Yes, some people still have 10 children. Don't ask me questions. The third struggle I had was realizing that Jean had no personhood. Though individuality I could separate from the identity of mother to stake to the cross I had prepared for her. Jean is mother and nothing else. And so that made my whole thing hard. Like, I was like, so now what? So, and it also cleared up my head, because realizing that Jean had no identity outside of mother, I began to realize that the enemy here, the thing that deserved my eye, my anger, my hatred, my loathing, was actually this patriarchal institution of motherhood, this patriarchal definition of motherhood and what mothers stand for. The last struggle was trying to encapsulate the tragedy of all the characters in this story, like trying to encapsulate the suffering of Jamie, in relation to the horrific murder of Ali, and then in relation to Jean, who perpetrated these two things, but also Jean being a victim of the system as well. Just tragedy all around for the main characters here. And like, realizing that all of this tragedy is because of the identity of motherhood. Tragedy because real life people, they are real mothers. There are mothers everywhere. Motherhood is a thing, celebrated, idolized. A system of being that demands one to erase self and personality and identity just to be the center of somebody else's world. A system that contorts persons into something unrecognizable that would take years of specialized treatment to recover from, i.e. psychosis in some cases, and sometimes straight to jail. While the system that puts such demands on a certain demographic of people will provide no protection in cases of abuse, in cases of neglect, in cases of inescapable poverty situations. There is no protection or provision made for the child, considering that's the entire driving force, the entire motivation of socializing women into giving birth, into having children. In Jane's case, her psychotic break manifested itself in her committing murder, shooting a gun even, and killing her best friend. And then she had to go to jail for it and started receiving psychiatric treatment for it. On to the next chapter of the video. In this chapter of the video, I want to give a little bit of my own basic theory or understanding of everything that I've researched so far, where I feel this ideology and the mysticism or around motherhood, its basis in sexism, where it all came from, and what that means for society, and then I want to finish it off with a reading of the conclusion of this female psychologist in the papers I mentioned earlier. So, that the universal experiential horror of pregnancy and childbirth bestows mothers with an infinite supply of human kindness and empathy is a myth propagated by the patriarchy to compel women, to coerce them even into becoming mothers. It assumes upon women an unasked for divinity which they must take up with no room for choice. It has its religious background. We can easily glean this from the famous story of Mary and Jesus in Christianity, where a child was foisted into a woman's womb by God and she was compelled by the angel Gabriel to carry it to term as the child was going to be the savior of the world. Mary is a saint across denominations of Christianity. Her sainthood is interpreted as a reward simply for the task of carrying a pregnancy to term, birthing it in horrid conditions, and being its mother. Think about it, the interactions that Jesus had were more with his mother, like they were recorded more with his mother than his father. His mother was the one like who scolded him for running away to the temple or staying behind the temple when they're supposed to go home after the religious holiday. Then his mother came to meet him at the wedding, like, oh, these people don't have wine. What are you going to do about it? And he went to do wine for them. Made wine out of water. Then there's also the sermon on the mount or something where people were like, blessed is the moon that carried you. And he was like, more than that, blessed are the people that listen to my word and take it up in their heart and blah blah blah. And it's like even Jesus was like, don't do this, don't prop up mothers just for giving birth, don't prop up a womb, don't saint a womb, rather take the word I am speaking. But of course, no, it doesn't work like that for the patriarchy. They redefine religion as they see fit, but like that's not the focus of today. The Catholic Church and its edicts were the rule of law at some point in history. They're also notorious for their missionary work the world over, and so it makes sense that a large part of the socialization of women and children, girl children, would involve internalizing this ideology surrounding women and motherhood, that pregnancy and motherhood was divine and should be done without question. Question being abortion right. Question being, what if I don't want to have children? Question being, what if I wanted to adopt a child? Well, I don't think Catholics have a thing against adoption, but like if you internalize the ideology that having a child is a matter of course for you, having a child means you are special, and good. Having a child is a blessing from God, not a choice that you make. Well, would you be eager to? How would you feel if you are put in a position where you can't ever have children? The idea of adoption would feel like a failure on your part as a girl socialized in that system, socialized into that worldview. So like it's things to think about, bro. It's things to think about. Let's continue. Okay, where was I? Also another thing, the Catholic Church does not permit abortion. In fact, most all religions reject abortion. And I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of religions that have sainted women for being mothers who gave birth to saviors or prophets. And in this case, all of them were what? Boys. Ah, God, this shit is too. It's too societal implications of this as we can see in society today. Generally, when harm is done to a child, no one looks to the mother, and rightfully so, because men, which that statement alone is very sexist, very, very sexist. Why is there an expectation of men to be like predominant abusers of children? And I know there are more numbers, yeah, to prove that yes, this is happening. But like, why is it that the first thought of anybody is like, ah, of course, that of course, regardless of the number, that of course is sexist, that men abuse children and women don't. And simply because women won't, because they carry children, they give birth to children, they are divine. Giving birth to children is divine. Being pregnant is divine. It makes you more properly upright than a man. In fact, they'll say a mother. When something happens, any workplace, they'll say, like, if a woman is heading a department and she's being very mannish, like masculine energy and all of that, people will be like, ah, and she has children, and she has children, she's doing this to us, you know. In school, in universities, when we have like female lecturers that don't give a shit, like they are just very strict on their demand of performance and all of that, people are like, ah, don't you have children, you know, don't you have children, all those kind of things, like as if having children makes women more empathetic, and that is sexist. No, having children does not make you anything special, because having children is a choice. Being a mother is a choice. But so the result of, you know, not expecting women to do harm to children, it causes major risk of non-physical abuse of children to pass under the radar, inflicted by mothers usually. Mothers are in charge of disciplining children. Disciplining being like hitting your child, you know, it's allowed, because they'll say things like, here they'll say things like, na me born you, na me go beat you, you know, that kind of thing. Like, as in, because I gave birth, you have rights to beat you, to violate you, like that. And they'll say it's discipline, which rubbish, is abuse. Those kind of abuse is not treated as anything, not even labeled as abuse. It's like taboo to say your mother abused you. Like, how, what, she was just doing her best, she gave birth to you, she took care of you, blah blah blah, your father was not there. And it's like, still does not still does not minimize the fact that you did abuse the child. But like, I'm getting too ahead of myself. Nowadays there's this term called emotional incest. This specific kind of abuse is the one where, like, the term was recently coined. I don't know if it was recently coined. I didn't check any papers on this, but like, I came to the knowledge of it like in recent years, you know, this recent years. Emotional incest is when women place their expectations, their romantic and affectionate expectations of their husband on their sons. And see the name, emotional incest, when we're discussing literal CSA. Tell the type that scorn any girl, any female companionship, discourage any female companionship that their son might have or want to cultivate. And then we have the complicated, it's not complicated, because completely complicated is sexist. Because emotional incest is complicated, because how does this boy grow into a man and try to untangle and unlearn, you know, this connection he has with his mother that he felt is just love, as his mother made him believe, but like realizing that it is not love, it is dependency. But anyway, there's the mother to girl child abuse dynamic, when mothers start to conceive of a competition with their daughters, or they try to live vicariously through their daughters. You know, they have an obsessive, unhealthy connection with their daughters, like monitoring them excessively, you know, shaming them. All of these feelings that come about, you know, both with boys and both with girls, is like with mothers, like mother to son, mothers to daughter. It usually come about when these women come to the realization that, and it's usually late in life, you know, later in life when their children are approaching teenagehood, you know, young adulthood, they come to this awareness that sometimes all those women that used to do children pageant for like their little daughters, that thing is also part of it. They shall come to the awareness that they were robbed, you know, or they were not allowed to pursue the dreams that they had for their own life. If any of this is making sense to you, please let me know in the comments. Let me know. All of this count as abuse. And then there are mothers like Jane. The societal implications of raising women, raising girls to believe in this, will give birth to produce mothers like this. Basically, that's just like where I chapter ends. And so, for the conclusion, before I give off what I in like before I piece together what if I state my own position now, like where I'm on the scale from hatred to where am I at? Let me just read out this conclusion of the psychologist on that paper. Society sees this rejection of the husband's sexual demands as a pathological behavior, proving her to be unfit, unhealthy, or immature. What seems to be a more pertinent question is, why does society seem so ready to accept a wife's sexual lack of enthusiasm or dysfunction as a valid reason why a father might turn to his daughter to have his rightful, in quote, sexual needs met? Schultz is amazed that in the absence of the wife, the father feels it is his primary right to continue to receive the traditional services a wife provides, including sexual relations. Butler demands to know what gives the father the right to make the damaging choice of using his own daughter as a sexual surrogate. More important, Ward questions what gives society the right to primarily blame the mother for the sexual transgressions of the father against their daughter. Can society not see the extraordinary power that is exerted by the father as perpetrator? Not only does he hold the economic balance of power in his patriarchal family, but he controls all other aspects in the family by violence, abuse, and threat to both mother and daughter. He terrorizes the mother and renders her helpless. Both the mother and daughter are submissive, helpless victims, property owned by the father and used for a sexual convenience. Wattenberg questions, how did this myth of blaming the mother develop and why were they accepted? She demands that theorists give up their sexist beliefs and research the phenomena of incest in an objective manner. Society often blames the mother in the incestuous family more so than the father for the victimization of her daughter. She is blamed for abandoning her family, encouraging a role reversal with her daughter, refusing sexual relations with her husband, eventually encouraging and setting up her daughter to meet her husband's sexual needs. She is accused of colluding with the father, allowing this incestual behavior to continue and not rescuing her daughter. Society sees her as a villain, the silent partner in the incestual triangle, but possibly the mother is being unjustly accused. She too may be a victim. In reviewing her own background of emotional deprivation and abuse as a child, it appears the mother has not had the opportunity to experience a healthy relationship with her own parents or learn appropriate maternal skills. This is so true for Jane Cross. Certain personality characteristics such as passivity, dependence, masochism, and depression make it impossible for her to protect herself as a child and also as a mother. The question remains, is it fair for society to expect a mother to protect her family when she is incapable of protecting herself? More research needs to be directed at answering questions such as, under what circumstances is the mother rendered helpless? What are the intervening variables that produce the mother's subordination, the isolation of the family, the incapacity for disclosure of a sexual assault on the daughter? Does the mother know the incest is occurring? Is the mother's denial grounded in reality, or is it a defense against an inadmissible horror? What prevents the mother from taking action? Once these questions have been acknowledged, maybe a more truthful answer will be found to the question, is the mother in the incestuous family a victim or a villain? Anyway, so hearing all of that, my hatred of Jane has been completely deconstructed, and I have also had to unlearn things that I thought I would not perpetrate, because of my reading, through my reading of this book and review of it. So that's my conclusion, that in this case, the only thing I like bear resentment over Jane about is her mother of Ali. I don't know. Like, of course, mental illness will make people do unspeakable things, but it's also not still a full get out of jail free card. She's literally in jail. So yeah, I think her going to jail was a nice way to end it, and also receiving psychiatric treatment along with it. Like, that's just where I'm at in the book. So you guys tell me, would you read a book like this? What did you think of the review? What did you think of my research? Like, this thing really scattered my brain, scrambled my brain. I had to take a lot of breaks in between writing it because of how triggering it was. The whole conversation, there were like graphic descriptions in the papers of this CSA by of sons and daughters. Like, it was just graphic. It was horrifying. I had nightmares for weeks. I only recently got over some nightmares, and like I'm just happy that I got to this point. Yeah, I'm happy that the hatred did not persist. Like there was no basis of my hatred, and I could easily let it go because eventually Jamie, found peace. Jamie got the help he needed, and he adjusted. Even his eating habits became, normalized. If Jamie got the help he need, he got the justice he deserved. Like I feel that is all that matters in cases like this. Okay, I don't have to remember this book with memories of hatred and annoyance at her. Like she was a victim in all of this. Yeah. So I'll see you next day. Thank you for spending time with me. Let me know your thoughts down below. Okay, bye bye.